Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to talk about some of the fantasy authors that I think are the most versatile in the genre. So people who are writing fantasy today where you need help picking a book by them because their stories are so different from one another. Or a genre or an author, who you could pick up a story and maybe not enjoy it, but know that there are tons of other books out there that you might love by this author or you might want to explore by this author. These are authors who cannot be put into a box, whose style or concepts or plots or characters feel so distinct from one another that you really can't find a great way to categorize them. And there's one author in particular that I've talked about a lot recently who's going to end up on this list. And so you're probably tired of me saying that this person is a really versatile author, but it was because of him that I thought I wanted to put this list together. Another reason that I wanted to do this is that I have seen videos that I usually really enjoy about whether you're going to continue with a certain author if you have liked or disliked their work. And I think for these ones, it would be really difficult to make that choice because even if you don't like a book, even if you don't like a whole pocket of books by some of these people, there's still a good chance that you will find something to enjoy. So perhaps if you watch this and you feel like you have written any of these authors off, this might give you a little bit of evidence to maybe take a second look at that decision. But I'm going to get started. I think there are 5. Yep, there are 5 people. And then I have some names that I found while I was thinking about this and kind of looking at things related to this for authors that other people have identified as very versatile that I have not read from. So I would love to know from you if you agree with those names and which ones you think that I should check out. The very first one is an author that I talk about all the time on the channel, and that is Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman, I think, may be the most versatile fantasy author who is writing today. Neil Gaiman, and initially when I put this video together, I was like, I'm going to look up how many books they've all written and like make that as part of the introduction for each person. And then I was reading Neil Gaiman's bibliography. I was like, no, there's no way that I'm counting up all of these things and listing them. So all I can say is that if you do not know, Neil Gaiman writes in a variety of styles, genres, age ranges. He writes short stories, novellas, comic books, graphic novels. He writes novels. He writes series. He kind of has one series. He writes in young adult, in middle grade, in adult. A lot of his stories transcend that age categorization or even transcend genre trappings. And he writes with like a really interesting blend of fantasy and fairy tale and folklore and horror and sci-fi. And it creates a collection of books that are very unique just in the fantasy genre itself. Like his books are unlike any other author's books, but his books also feel really distinct from one another. So if you pick up American Gods and you don't love it, I don't think you should give up on Neil Gaiman altogether because you might really like Neverwhere or you may really enjoy Stardust. Like there's so many places that you can start with Neil Gaiman and there are so many things that you can enjoy. If you don't like his novels, you might enjoy his short fiction. If you don't like his mainstream stories, you might like his graphic novels. There's so many points of reference, so many places to jump in that if you don't like something, there's so much more to explore. And I think that I'm not the only person who holds this opinion. Neil Gaiman is celebrated in popular culture. He is celebrated. He is critically acclaimed. He has won the Nebula, the Locust, the Newbery, the Carnegie Medal. He's won prizes for different genres. I think he also won the Bram Stoker Award. So he's won horror awards. He's won fantasy awards. He's won children's, like very prestigious children's literary awards. And I think that's just a testament to the versatility of his writing. I do have a video for, how to read Neil Gaiman or where you might like to start with Neil Gaiman. That's a bit of an older video. But to be honest, I think I could put together one of those for any of the authors on this list because I think they all do require some navigation so that people can tailor their selections to their own personal choices. But I'm always excited when I see that something new is coming out by Neil Gaiman because I genuinely have no idea what it's going to be like. I have no idea what I'm in for, what kind of story it's going to be, and it's fun when you have an author like that who can keep you on your toes. The second author that I'm going to talk about is the person that I've said this a lot about lately, and the person whose works kind of jump-started me wanting to record this video, and that is Adrian Tchaikovsky. So Adrian Tchaikovsky, for anyone who doesn't know, is an author of mostly fantasy and sci-fi. He writes broadly across different types of fiction. So he writes short stories, he writes novellas, he writes standalone novels, he has series, some short and some very lengthy, and has been successful with almost all of these endeavors. He's really well known for writing the science fiction novel Children of Time, and I believe that won him the Arthur C. Clarke Award, or at least got him nominated for the Arthur C. Clarke Award. But I think he's also won fantasy awards, and he's just an incredibly versatile author. What I like about Adrian Tchaikovsky, and I am only at the beginning of my Tchaikovsky journey. He has an immense bibliography, and I have only skimmed the surface. I have read, I think, 4 things by him. So I read a standalone historical fantasy novel. I read a novella that was fantasy oriented. I read a novella that was a very interesting blend of fantasy and sci-fi. And I read a work of sci-fi. So I read Children of Time. And all of these stories were incredibly different from one another. From the characters, to the writing style, to the execution of the plot, the themes. You could hate Children of Time. You could pick up that novel and absolutely loathe it, and I could still hand you the other novel that I've read by him, Guns of the Dawn, and feel confident that you would like it because they are so intensely different from one another. I have another of his books that I'm hoping to pick up this month, and I really want to explore more of his novellas. But if you have also read very widely in Adrian Tchaikovsky's bibliography, I would love to know if you have noticed any patterns in his writing, or if, like me, you think that he truly is so talented and capable of creating stories that are so distinct from one another. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having a signature style. Like, there are authors that I adore because I know when I'm going to go into their books, I know what I'm getting. I know what the writing's going to be like. I know what kinds of characters, at least the types of archetypes of characters that I'm going to find. I know emotionally what kind of journey I'm going to go on, if there's going to be really emotional highs and lows, or if it's going to be more of a like kind of steadfast novel. But with Adrian Tchaikovsky, at least so far, no idea. I have no idea what I'm going in for, and it is really exciting. I don't know if I'm getting hard sci-fi. I don't know if I'm getting fantasy with a twist. I don't know if I'm getting like steampunk. I have no idea what everything is adding up to, and it makes it really exciting to have a new work by him to pick up. So he is the author that kind of jump-started my thinking about this, and I cannot wait to read more by him. The third author on this list is another one that I talk about all the time. I'm getting a sense that I really like authors who are versatile, whose style kind of transcends those really strict genre boundaries. But the third author that I want to talk about is Stephen King. And I know that I mostly talk about fantasy authors, and Stephen King has enough of a fantasy bibliography that I could refer to him as a fantasy author if I so desired. But what really made me consider putting him on this list is that I did a chat over on Kyle's channel at Read by Kyle, and I was joined by some other booktubers in that chat. And it was fascinating to see that some of us had complete opposite opinions on Stephen King. There were huge portions, huge chunks of his bibliography that, you know, some of us loved and the other ones loathed, and we could draw a Venn diagram around the books that we loved by Stephen King, and those diagrams would not even intersect. And I think, you know, part of that is obviously that he has been so prolific. Like there are not a lot of authors who have as many books, who have written as many books as Stephen King. And so obviously within that, you know, the more books you have, the more likely it is that you'll find something to someone's particular tastes. But I also just think it's that he is a lifelong reader. He clearly loves reading from a variety of genres. He has been influenced by a variety of different genres. And I think that he has reached the point in his career where he can write about the things that interest him. And so you can see these kind of phases. You can see that he has a horror collection and then a more fantasy leaning collection. There's some really hard hitting, more literary style stories. And then you have kind of the cold case, hard crime books that he's so fond of writing these days. And so when you pick up a book by him, if you don't enjoy it, there are so many more that you could pick from. And there are some threads that are common. I do think that his style is pretty consistent. I would like to think that after reading so much Stephen King, I could probably pick up a book that was unlabeled and know if he had written it or not. So I don't know if stylistically his work is quite as versatile as the previous authors that I had mentioned, but certainly in terms of approach and content, there's a lot of variability in Stephen King's bibliography. I think that you could absolutely love a book by him and then maybe not have as much enjoyment for another. Just because you have disliked one of his books, it doesn't mean that you won't like something else. And there's really something for fans of most genres. He's got the crime, he's got time travel, so he's got some science fiction, he's got fantasy, he's got, like I said, generational sagas, he's got short fiction, he's got novellas, so much. He has created so much art. And whether or not that is all to your taste, I think that we have to acknowledge the fact that what he has done is an incredible achievement. So I think that there is probably something for most readers in Stephen King's bibliography, but he gets kind of painted with that horror author's brush. And so people may be missing out on books that they would find really enjoyable just because they tend to think of him in a certain way. So I think that Stephen King is incredibly versatile. There are books of his that I'm still too scared to read. So I can't weigh in on a lot of his scariest books because I still haven't worked myself up to being able to read them. But I have certainly found things to enjoy in a variety of genres by him. And even though, like I said, his style is maybe not as versatile, it doesn't change that much. He has a consistent style of writing. The content of the books certainly does have a lot of variation. The next person I'm going to talk about is someone who has a very small bibliography. So this is kind of the opposite of Stephen King. He has I think Kyle said it was 70 something novels when we did that chat together. The next author that I'm going to talk about has 2. And you could ask yourself, how can I put someone who has 2 books on this list where I'm talking about this versatility, how distinct these books feel? But this person has written 2 books. They have both been incredibly successful and they are very distinct from one another. And that author is Susannah Clark. So Susannah Clark is a British author who wrote the book Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and then also the recent release Piranesi, which came out in 2020. And those books are incredibly different from one another. Jonathan Strange is an alternate history, historical fantasy that focuses on magicians and is written in that kind of classic style. It is a huge, beefy, kind of Dickensian story and follows a lot of the common tropes and conventions of books written during that time period. I think it takes place in the Edwardian time period. And then we have Piranesi, which is the opposite in so many ways. It is, instead of kind of this I don't want to say dry, but that kind of really formal type of story that Jonathan Strange is, we instead have this super whimsical, light, not in content, but kind of light in style, very dreamlike sequence that is Piranesi. It follows a completely different character. The setup is really different. They both are linked, I guess, in the fact that they are both fantastical. They both involve magic, but they are incredibly different from one another. And unlike other authors on this list, Susannah Clark is someone who, it seems, pours a lot of research, a lot of time, a lot of effort into crafting the best possible book that she can. And I think I also read in an article that she is limited due to a chronic illness. And so the time and the energy to write can sometimes be difficult for her. But I am happy that we have been blessed with 2 novels by such a talented author. And even though they are very different from one another, I think, you could pick up Jonathan Strange and dislike it, and I would still recommend Piranesi. You could pick up Piranesi and dislike it, and I think it would be easy to still recommend Jonathan Strange. And that's really what I'm looking for, is an author who can pull out completely different books and make people fall in love with them for completely different reasons. Susannah Clark does have a short story collection as well. I have not read it. I think it is set at around the same time as Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, or Mr. Norrell. Maybe that is more similar in style and content to that book, but again, I still think that she deserves a spot on this list. And I mean, it's my list, so I could put whoever I want on it. But I like to feel justified in making these decisions so that this is a cohesive and interesting video. But I do think that she has earned her place on the list. And then the very last author is another one that I have not explored extensively, and that is Ursula K Le Guin. So my experience with Ursula K Le Guin is not the broadest. She is an author that I certainly want to read more from, but I have started the Wizard of Earthsea series, and I've read the first book in that series, and then I just recently read the book The Lathe of Heaven. And when I did The Lathe of Heaven, I was researching some of the background because I made a review of that for my classic sci-fi series, and I like to put in some of the background about the book and the social context and those kinds of things. So I did get to going a little bit deeper into Ursula K Le Guin's backstory and her bibliography and what her books are like. And certainly the two that I read are very distinct. Lathe of Heaven and Wizard of Earthsea have some common points in terms of some of the philosophical exploration that Le Guin does, but in terms of content, character, they are very distinct. And I get the impression that that is the same for a lot of her work. I think there are some threads that are interwoven amongst all of her novels, some philosophical ideas, an approach to the world, a philosophy of life that is consistent throughout her work, likely because it is a consistent belief of hers, but incredible diversity in terms of character, theme, execution. Ursula K Le Guin, in terms of everyone on this list, Neil Gaiman writes in a variety of genres as well, but Ursula K Le Guin has written in science fiction, she's written in fantasy, she's written short stories, and she has written literary fiction to the point where she was actually nominated for the Pulitzer Prize in, I believe it was 1997. So she did not win, but there was, I can't remember if it was a collection of her short stories or if it was a novel. I think it may have been a short story collection that was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. So I think, even though I don't think that this matters, I think that the further we come, the more people recognize that there are really talented people writing genre fiction, and that some of those really aggressive walls that are put up either by the literary community or marketing or publishing, they mean less and less as time goes on. But even at a time when genre fiction was very isolated, when there still was not as much discourse about it, when it was not taken as seriously as a literary form, Ursula K Le Guin was still finding extreme success in both kind of genre spheres, winning the Locust, the Nebula, the World Fantasy Award. Like, I think she's won one of everything at this point, but then also kind of reaching those heights of literary fiction as well, which I don't know if this is true because I'm not involved in the literary fiction world, but it seems like it would be like a little, it could maybe be open to people who are potentially a bit snobby in their literary opinions. I'm not saying that that is true, but I feel like it is a distinct possibility. So to me, it says a lot about the quality of her work and the diversity of the types of stories that she writes, that you could end up being so successful in both of those spheres. Because despite the fact that we have such talented authors in the sci-fi fantasy community, we don't see a lot of that overlap. Okay, had to take a quick coughing break. Those are the 5 authors who I feel like are particularly versatile. Other authors that I have heard spoken about in that same manner would be authors like Nicola Griffith, and I've read one novella by her, but would really like to explore more of her work. There is also Jo Walton, which I have one book by Jo Walton. I haven't read anything by her. The book that I do have was sold to me as like Pride and Prejudice, but all the characters are dragons. So I would really like to get to that this year and then also explore more of her bibliography. Another author that came up a lot when people talk about this kind of topic is Catherine and I believe her last name is Valenti, maybe. I know that she wrote The Fairy Who Circumnavigated the World in a Ship of Her Own Making. I believe that's the title of the book, which has been a book that's been on my backlisted TBR for a really long time. But I have heard that a lot of her books feel very distinct. They, transcend genre a lot of the time. She has written for different age categories. But I would also like to know if there are any authors who, when you think of that really versatile style, write in a lot of different topics, they are able to transition between age categorizations really easily. Who are the authors that you think about? I would love to have your recommendations. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you with another one soon. Bye!